one of the hardest parts for me to reconcile has always been the scam word.
So if you are an affiliate of a company, it's not just that you might get dragged into their case, you might get on the radar.
They call it joint and several liability, which means you're all jointly liable, and if one of you can't pay for the full amount of damages they're looking for, then all of you are individually responsible for the entire amount.
If you're an affiliate of a company that's breaking the rules, you are absolutely liable. You absolutely could get brought into the case.
You're responsible for your affiliates too.
And so I'm like, people ask me like, what's your mission? I'm like, my mission is to make sure that every entrepreneur can't say, I didn't know when it comes to FTC guidelines. Welcome back to Don't Say That, and today, we have a brave soul with us who's going to share his story. Listen, this is one of those interesting podcasts where getting guests on isn't the easiest thing in the world because no one really wants to either talk about it or get on the radar, and quite frankly, that's not how it works. I don't think that there's any risk of being on here, but these stories are important, and I'll tell you why they're important, because I talk to quite a few marketers who just really feel it won't happen to me. Or worse, they say, I'll deal with it when it happens. We just had someone say this recently. I'll deal with it when it happens. And I think I could have started convulsing when they said that because I know what that means and they don't. And it's like the last thing they want to deal with. So one of the great honors that we're going to be able to have on this podcast is to bring on guests to speak about their experience. You can hear what they were doing, what happened, how it was like, and what they're doing afterwards. What is life after the FTC for them? And the biggest reason here is for those of you who may have already had a case at the FTC, it'll be hopefully inspirational. For those majority of you who haven't had a case with the FTC, this is Greg and my way of saying, shaking you and saying, clean it up, because your whole, it won't happen to me, is BS. So again, remember, if you want our free marketing assessment and if you want us to start helping you by auditing your marketing, looking at it, giving you access to our team to review your marketing on a month-to-month basis, go below right now and get the free assessment. Okay, go to naoac.com/free. I think, no, audit, sorry, naoac.com/audit. Forgot my own URL. Or click it right below in the description in YouTube. And of course, remember, Don't Say That. The book launches on April 16th. I think from the time this releases, it's like right coming up, okay? So make sure you support us. Don't just get one book, get 10, get 25. Give a book to everyone in your marketing department and any marketer that you like. So now, without further ado, I want to introduce to you someone. I've jokingly created a reference called FTC Bro, and that is just someone who has been through the ringer and come out the other side and survived. Another friend of mine who is an FTC Bro, we just jokingly call each other that. So welcome to the podcast, the FTC Bro, Mike G. Mike, what's up? Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate you.
Hey man, thank you for bringing me on. You know, I love that term FTC bro. So I'll use that. Yeah, that's good.
Hashtag FTC Bros. All right. So, by the way, guys, Mike was a client or is a client of Greg's. And so, Greg, thanks for talking to him and getting him to come on. I'm going to just let you tell your story, Mike. I mean, and just for a clear reference, everyone, I don't know Mike. I don't know Mike's story. I know Mike. I know of Mike. I don't know his story. Greg knows it, and Greg thought it was really relevant and a great story to bring onto the podcast. So, Mike, take it away.
Awesome. All right. And I'll begin by saying I'm not the best with like dates because it's been 5 or 6 years now. So it's a little bit, in the past, but I should be pretty accurate, but, I'll do my best. Yeah. So I'll jump back and I'll do a quick little recap. So Anik, like you, I began in sort of the info industry, internet industry back in like 2006. I think you were right before that. So I've been in it forever. I was trained up to be like pretty hardcore direct response copywriter, which that's a whole other thing we could probably go into, because I think a lot of that training is pretty much like the FTC reads the courses that come out and says, and pretty much said, yeah, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. You know, I think a bunch of what we're taught is actually the things that they can't stand. You know,
Yeah.
urgency, can't do that. False scarcity, no, no, no. You know, um, so anyway, I've been around the space for quite some time, built several companies, 7-figure, eight. My biggest one was 8 figures. We were doing, this is with Greg there. We were towards the end. We were doing, anywhere from 20 to 30 gross annually, which is, at the time, I didn't think it was that big of a thing. I was like, yeah, of course, fine, but now I'm like, that was pretty awesome. It's been time has gone by, but so yeah, so I ended up, we always did multiple things because we were very good at doing like online traffic. We had a great sales team. And so we really built up this really incredible company. I think at our peak, we had over 100 people on our staff. I joke that I had like 2 jobs then, because I was like CEO by day, and then I was like CTO at night with the team in India. So that's how like it was fun and bad, because there wasn't a time. This is back in the days of like Skype, so I couldn't really go on. Like, I could go online and work all day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was always someone online that I could instruct or direct or help. It was like we had staff everywhere. So things were going very, very great there. And my company, and I had different partners in the company. And basically, we were, I'm trying to think of the best way to like lay the groundwork, but basically we were able to promote as an affiliate other companies' products. And I think that's kind of what sets my story apart some from the general stuff, because I like to say it like this, it's what got us into this mess was we were promoting a product we didn't make for a company we didn't own with ads we didn't write.
Yes.
That basically, and this is like, we'll call this like PGC. This is pre-Greg. Um, this is the PGC era.
PGs.
So as we grew and grew, we kind of, I think this is probably what a lot of people think too, is they think, well, I'm small. When I get big, I'll bring somebody in, they'll fix everything, life will be great. And so we had that kind of thought as well. And not that we ever thought we were doing anything bad. Like, we had an attorney on our staff who reviewed everything, who went through all of our stuff, who reviewed contracts, who reviewed setups, who reviewed ads. And, I have the emails to show it. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this this, fix that. And so my partner, I think, met Greg probably somewhere in Utah. And and Greg was saying, well, there's a lot of stuff you might not know about. You might think you're doing good, but you aren't. And we're like, well, great, because that was the thing about us. Like, I think in that space, and you might feel this way too, but I always felt like we were really good. Like, we worked so hard. I would look at the other offers that were out there, and I joke about it. You would see these offers that would be like 1 click, 2 click, 3 clicks, boom, you're rich. Like, these were like the ads that I was comparing myself to. Right. And I was like, I'm not that kind of guy. I wouldn't ever do anything like that, and it would be, and we would get hit up all the time with like, oh, I got this great offer. And I would go see it. And it would just be like the scammiest, shadiest thing I've ever seen. And I was just like, no way. So I always thought like we were better. We were good. We worked hard. Like, there was all these great things. And then basically, though, the company that we would run the products for, they ended up getting shut down by the FTC. So that was like a shock to me, like really shocked. I didn't know, I had no idea. And
Was that
basically,
company, sorry, quick question, was that
yeah,
company like an MLM or just a normal info marketing
they
company?
were like I won't say they're MLM per se, but they were technically a 2-tier affiliate payout
Okay.
company. They were in the big ticket space. So
Okay.
they sold like they would sell more expensive products. So
Yeah.
they had a sort of like a tiered sales thing where they would have like a 2K and then like a 20, 30, 40K kind of upgrade
Got it.
for the events. And so the crazy thing is, I'm kind of jumping a little bit here out of order, but so Greg came on, and Greg, we just gave Greg everything. Like, here, Greg, here's all of our stuff. Here's the ads that we got from them. Here's what we say. Here's, you know, and Greg was like, yeah, I don't like this. I don't like
Mm.
this. I don't like this. And this is when I first started to hear the idea of like implied claims and, the average results of a typical user as surveyed in a scientific survey. Like, I was like, good Lord. So we started to implement surveying and trying to get people to fill things out. And so we could have average results. And so, but the second Greg said, like, this is not good, and he said, I don't like that other company, even though it cost us at the time millions because we were owed in payouts, we just walked away. We shut it down, left it. And
Mm.
we built our own company selling our own products. That was in the e-commerce space. So we were doing like Shopify, things like that. We were like probably the top 5 Shopify affiliate at that time because we pushed all of our people. Step 1, sign up for Shopify. Step 2, like that kind
Yeah.
of thing. And we ended up like, I think like 6 months had gone by, and that's when we found out that the company had gotten shut down by the FTC. And like, I was really shocked because I had been to a few of the events. I had, seen people there. And I think that was, one of the hardest parts for me to reconcile has always been the scam word, like everything's a scam. This is a scam. That was a scam. And it's like, if you were there wasn't a single person who ever felt like we were all or trying to perpetuate some worldwide scam. Like, it's like the weirdest thing to me. Now, if you aren't there and you just read the headlines, you can be like, oh yeah, it just sounds like a scam, but that part for me was always kind of like tough to understand. But yeah, so end of the day, they got shut down. And maybe a month or two after that, we got Greg, what was it called? It was like a saving when you have to save stuff. What's that term? I forget.
So it was a litigation hold letter. They asked them to save all of their documents and everything else. And then the trustee in the case, so there was a full asset freeze on the main company just because 13B was still in effect. So AMG capital management hadn't happened yet. So under 13B, they get a full asset freeze on the company, which means they froze the assets of the company and the individuals. And so a trustee was appointed in the case, and the trustee came to Mike and said, we think that you owe us back money that we've paid you in commissions. And that's what started their involvement.
Yeah. And we were basically like being treated like a vendor who
Right.
received payments. And because of the company was perceived to be fraudulent, then everything the company did, kind of like the fruit of the poison tree
Right.
argument, everything the company did, every dollar that went out should be paid back in essence, to go back to what the FTC will call victims. The crazy part is when the company was shut down, I had people emailing me saying like, "Is this true? This can't be true. I was about to go to the event. They were shocked. I'm sure there were people that weren't, just like anything, but so again, that was all very odd stuff for me. So we were kind of early on being asked to provide help, provide support, because one of the other people in the original suit, which we weren't in, was kind of gonna fight it. So then we were asked, can you help us? We need like documents, we need emails, we need text messages. And the original requests were very much focused on communications with that particular person. And so we kind of thought, okay, we're good dudes, we'll go and help out. And this is probably where I think people could learn a lot, is talk to Greg before you do anything, because we had different attorneys, and we kind of just were like, okay, well, we don't want to drag Greg into this, which is stupid as can be. I don't know why we thought that way, but we kind of just were like, okay, we'll work with the trustee. We hired some like trustee specialist firm who's dealt with that trustee, and we thought, oh, this would be great because it was very much a controlled issue. We thought there would be some kind of a settlement with the trustee, just to kind of resolve it. And we were even told at the time that the FTC didn't really care about us. We weren't really we were just an affiliate, and on and on. So where it gets really expensive, and I think this is my other piece of advice, and now I know why companies have retention policies, and that is that like I basically had kept every email, text I'd ever sent my entire life since since like 2007, 8. And so that ended up becoming a super expense because it was like any text message, any email, any communication, and on a you just went through it even more than me.
Yeah.
But it was basically like we ended up spending just on like the discovery process. And keep in mind, we had never been sued. We were doing this on our own. We were good guys, I guess.
Mm.
I don't know if we were dumb or what, but we were just doing it. And so we spent over $1 million just in discovery, just paying people to go through the emails, go through the text messages. I mean, and then you have employees that are meanwhile, but they're talking and they're like, oh yeah, don't forget about Skype. And then like everyone's like, oh my gosh. Not that we're trying to not do it, but I'm like, we don't need your help to advise us on things we forgot about. And then, and then like, and now so now it's like, okay, now we got to go figure out how to get all that stuff, so there's just all these different things that they pile up. And so I think for us, it was a very slow roll, very, very slow roll. And then we were directly talking with the FTC, and it was very much cordial and thank you for this, thank you for that. Do you have anything about this? Can you search for this keyword that we can find some more things on? And right
So
around,
at this
yeah,
point, you weren't technically under investigation, or you were at this
we were
point.
never told. That was the weirdest part. So we were never told like, hey, you're under
So you just thought
investigation.
you're doing a bunch of discovery to help them
So yeah,
for the other company.
they issued a CID, but I don't think that Mike knew that was the official term at the time. And I wasn't I had represented for a brief moment, and then they hired another
Uh,
firm to help them with this. And the firm that they hired never really sat down with them and said, hey, this is what it is. In fact, what Mike said, he's told me before, they told him like, hey, we're not the focus of the investigation. They never go after affiliates. And
Yeah.
so they think they're just being good guys trying to help the FTC. And I've had cases before where I've had clients that have gotten CIDs that were not the target of the investigation. And I have communicated documents to the FTC in furtherance of their lawsuit against a third party. So I can see, I mean, I wasn't there to represent on this, but I can see like a third party company getting a CID thinking, but my gut was, and this is when they came to me, was you got to get out of this as soon as possible, because if they get sued, it's possible you'll get pulled in. And so if I had been representing, I wasn't, I wish I was. I mean, we've both talked about
I
this,
wish you did. Yeah.
is I would have said, dude, they are not your friends. They are not trying to help you out on this. And you are very much at risk of being a target in this as well. But that's not a conversation that him and his partner ever had with their attorneys. They didn't know that. So they think they're just being good actors, giving all this stuff. So anyway, sorry, Mike. But yeah, from my perspective, I sat in the sidelines because they'd call me every once in a while and I'd be like, that doesn't feel right, you know?
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Yeah, we made the decision to hire a very expensive DC law firm where it's like, oh, who's the guy? Oh yeah, our kids are on the same baseball team. I see him every Saturday. We kind of we thought maybe that was the better strategy. Hindsight, and I mean, I told this to Greg. I think I've called people for you, Greg, or we've talked about it, where I just like hire Greg. Just don't even waste the time, the expense, because there's only so many options that you can do anyway. And it's very, unless you're like high up person, I don't think you're going to get hey, this is a good dude, drop it all. You know what I mean? Like you got to be an elite, I think, to get that kind of treatment.
Right.
So basically, yeah. So we were kind of going, and I can remember the day when finally, because I think I was just dumb back then. I just didn't know. I didn't have the experience. I remember the day when things changed because we got an email from our attorney forwarding the newest request from the FTC, and it was suddenly it was like a punch in the gut, because it was like, hey, from this date to this date, we see that this offer was run. Who wrote this offer? This date to this date, this happened. This date to this date, this was done. Can we get recordings of this call, this thing, this, and this, And suddenly, instead of it just being like general questions about the
Mm,
previous company, the other people involved, it was more and more focused on things that we were more involved with. And that's when I called the attorney. And then I think they made some phone calls. And then after that, they were like, yeah, just so you guys know, you are now directly a target of the investigation. I can't remember when that was. It was probably, it
now,
feels like it was about a year later. It may have been 6 to 8 months, but it was somewhere along that time frame.
now,
And
Mike, a
so,
few questions just
yeah,
to pause because I know that. So I got this question, Greg, the yesterday from someone who requested that we ask this on a podcast, and it's kind of fitting. And they said, "Hey, I am a salesperson for a company. If that company gets hit, can I, as a contractor salesperson, get hit as well?" But that's one question, and a lot of contractors and a lot of people that contract with the company agencies, they live in this falsehood, in my opinion, that they cannot get hit. The next thing that people don't realize, Mike, is that affiliates. So if you are an affiliate of a company, it's not just that you might get dragged into their case, you might get on the radar. So if that company goes down and you were a performer in that company, even if you don't get dragged into the case, you might just get on the radar, right? It's more of like the
yeah,
more times your name shows up, then at some point someone's just going to say, let's go look. And I think that my case was a bit that because there have been other FTC cases in the past that I wasn't involved in, but my name got asked because I was in the ecosystem. And I feel like my name just kept probably popping up. But in your case, Mike, were you one of their top affiliates? Like, were you
yeah.
what,
So let me,
and did they go
and
after a
I'll,
lot of other affiliates of the company or
yeah,
just you?
yeah, I'll say what happened. But real quick, just so I can't divulge anything because it's just a guy that
Sure.
I'm with, but
Yeah.
he actually, without going into any detail, just so people understand this, he was um, a salesperson for a company, and recently he got an FCC kind of investigation thing, and he was told like, don't open any new bank accounts, don't open any new companies, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. He called me just because he knows what I've been through. So he was like,
Yeah.
dude, what is this? And so it's an ongoing thing, I think. But just know that this dude doesn't own anything, just got people, he just called people. That's it for he's completely third party, and he's a sales guy. So, that's something, I don't know. It feels to me since around our time frame, I feel like the tentacles are growing, so
Mm,
they're going down the chain more. It used to just be like hit the biggest guy with the biggest stick, and everyone else will get scared and scatter. Now I
yeah.
think it's more like let's hit everybody we can hit, and then because
Yeah.
what I was
Did
told,
he did he get a
yeah.
CID officially? Do you know? Like that
I don't
salesperson?
know I don't know. I didn't want to know, to be honest. Like I was also like, dude, because the way it looks is like, why would you call this guy? Why would you call former, you know, guy? You know what I mean? Like I was like, so I was
Yeah.
trying to be very much like very respectful because I want to help out a friend, but also I know that, everything can be taken in a really negative way too.
Mm,
So I try to be a little bit careful, not don't ask too many details. I just kind of knew his background, and I forwarded him on to someone that I think could provide him help, who's in the legal field.
yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so yeah, basically what had finally went on is the lawsuit kind of came and went because our biggest fear was that it was going to be something they add you in kind of at the end. They can like edit the complaint and then throw you in, and that kind of came and went. So we were like, "Ooh, maybe we're okay." And I remember being on phone calls with like, two or three attorneys, and they would be just ranting about how this isn't right. You guys are getting screwed. We're gonna take care of this. And I'll get off the phone call, and it'd be like a 2 hour call, and I'd be thinking, well, that was like a $3,000 phone call for those dudes to be on that call. ranting about what they're going to do. And it never really ever turned into anything good for us. So basically, finally, I was actually on a road trip with my wife, and we were in like a RV, and we were driving back home, and it was a summertime. And that's when we officially got sent. It was like the last day too. It was like, this is the last day they can. I guess it was some kind of timing thing. And so it was like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock almost. We're like, hey, I might be all right, you know? And then like right before the time was done, we got forwarded the email of like the draft of the complaint against us. And what they did is basically they just said, we're going to take the whoever earned the top five. So they picked the top five of affiliates who earned the most at the company. So that was it. It wasn't like, I think that was just it. They said top five. We got to hit someone. Let's hit the top five. And our job at that point was like, do you see anything that you want to edit in the complaint? So it was like we did provide. I will say this. I do want to say this, and I think Anik, I've heard you say this too. The FTC are super professional. They're doing their job,
Yeah.
and I totally respect them for that. I even joked with Greg once. I would love to be to. I would work with the FTC if I could. If I could have owner like Anik, you actually wrote something a few weeks ago where you were talking about how you've thought about going to law school. You work with you just want to focus on your daughter. Like, it sounded so much like me that I actually copied it, sent it to my wife, and she was like, that looks good, yeah, you should post it. It was word for word, because I just have
Oh,
a
she
daughter
thought you
too.
were writing that.
Yeah, because
Well,
just everything you said was crazy.
ask Greg, man. How many times do I per week?
This
Like,
week, this week alone, like I've
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
So the state of Washington just passed this rule, the Washington Supreme Court, that you don't have
I
to
saw
take the
that.
bar. And so I sent Anik and I talked about like what the requirements for being. He's like, I'll do that. I'll be your law clerk for 3 years or whatever, and I'll become an
Yeah,
attorney.
yeah,
So
I know. I think it's
it's
it's probably partially Onic, like a trauma response, like because we lost the control in that area, and it's like, how do we get it back? And it's maybe we learn
th-
all this stuff. So
th-
I've
this
studied a
is
lot of
you're
stuff.
100% right. By the way, you're 100%. I heard an interview with someone who, gosh, it wasn't anything to do with the FTC. They had a major trauma in their life. I can't remember what it was, but I was listening to a YouTube video, and this person said that a huge trauma, and they decided to turn that into kind of their message. And so they're out there now helping people and talking about it and guiding people. And the interviewee was asking them about it, and they said this, and I had to pause the interview and take it in, because they said, well, like, how does it feel to relive that all the time? And he says, you know what? It's healing for me, because it makes me feel like I have control over something that I never had any control over, and it makes me, yeah, it makes me feel like I'm doing something about it rather than being a victim of it. And I literally just paused, and I'm like, holy crap, like, that makes a lot of sense. I joke with Greg. At this point now, Greg and I have been doing this podcast for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. The book's been a project that's been a work of passion for the both of us, and it's taken forever to write. I mean, I wanted to launch this book back in like Jan or Feb, and we're going to launch in April. We have our back end we have our back end academy. We've talked about certifications. We have our organization. We're getting it there, right? The software, I've restarted building the software 3 times. There's so many things that I want to do, and I'm not doing it. I haven't been able to get them out yet. So I haven't made $1 from this, like, me teach compliance. I've traveled, I've spent money. And last week I was at an event. There's 30 people in the room. And I talked about this for an hour and a half, and that was incredibly satisfied and fulfilled and felt great, although I didn't make a dime, right? And I don't even know if I ever will from that audience or from this stuff. But for me, it's like every time I leave that room, I'm like, hey, those people, they may or may not do what I'm asking them to do. They may or may not heed my advice. But if they get hit in the future, the one thing they'll never be able to say is, I didn't know. Because there was a bunch of things in my case that I got hit for that I just didn't know. And so I'm like, people ask me, like, what's your mission? I'm like, my mission is to make sure that every entrepreneur can't say I didn't know when it comes to FTC guidelines. And that's, I'm not saying that maliciously at all. Like, I'm just like, hey, I think there's a message to spread. But I laugh at what you nailed it, man. It's a thing about giving you control over this thing that completely stripped us of control.
Yeah, and yeah, it's been a crazy time. I'll try to. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'll try to speed up here. But the um, so we never actually. I guess yeah, we got sued kind of like at the very end, but it was more like the settlement process. So that's what we did next. They said to us, "Hey, look, we can go to trial, obviously, but if you guys will settle, we prefer that." Which I think is their kind of
Oh,
a standard. I think I don't know if
That's
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 still
what they did with you on it. Just think of it
Same.
just like this
Yeah.
CIP, the same thing for them. They went through. Did you guys do personal financial statements, Mike?
yeah, we did all that stuff. Yeah,
So then they did that, and then it's the same thing like yours. They went and they filed simultaneously the lawsuit and the settlement at the same time.
yeah, it was like all the same day. It was boom, 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 sign
Yeah.
this, bam.
What
So we
was
would go through.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead, keep going. No, keep
Oh,
going.
I do want to say one thing, and I don't want to sound like this is not an excuse at all, but I want people to understand this, and I don't know if they ever will unless they go through it. But I tell people this all the time, like, and again, this is not even an FTC thing. This is a attorney thing. No offense, Greg, but basically, an attorney's job is to take everything you've said or done and put it in the worst possible light they possibly can. Right? It's like like I joke about, like if you were going through a divorce, you didn't yell at your child. You verbally, emotionally, and spiritually abuse them for years, right? Like, you know what I mean? Everything becomes the most worst possible way you could say it. You didn't spank your child, you physically assaulted them to the point of they live in terror of you now. Like, you know what I mean? It becomes, whether in the truth is probably somewhere in between that for sure, but but again, that's their job. Like
Yep.
their literal job is to say, okay, when he said this, what's the worst possible way I can interpret that thing? And that's what I'm going to type. That's
Yeah.
their job. And it's very
They're not your friends. I
unemotional,
mean,
disconnected.
yeah,
Sorry.
they're not your friends, right? In the end, I mean, you're on
Yeah.
two opposite sides of a battle, and so they're not gonna.
It's an adversarial system, as they say, right? So basically, it's like, okay, I'm gonna give you. So like, I'll give you an example. Like we had a thing on there. They said where because basically once that all went down, then they were like, okay, well, the company you have now, let's dig into that. So this is where it got really bad because we kind of figured, okay, well, we'll settle it, we'll keep doing our thing, but that ended up kind of being pulled through because they just wanted the whole thing. They viewed it in their minds as one big thing. They
Right.
don't understand like one's company A, one's company B, one's company. It's all just one big, probably they would say scheme. Like it's just one big thing. And so what we ended up kind of like we found out. So they had a thing where they had written in the complaint like something to the effect of these guys, they never provided refunds for customers despite them begging for refunds. And we were like, that's not true. So we actually looked, we pulled, and we said everyone that ever asked for a refund got one, and we gave them the proof. Here's every refund we ever had. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're right, sorry about that, thanks so much for that, right? So I'm thinking, oh cool, well, that's at least that's one less bad thing they can say, that makes us look bad. But then when it got the update, it said, while they did provide refunds, it was most likely done only to further perpetuate the scheme and keep quiet those who were the most loud. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh man, you really can't win in that way, right? Like there's always, and again, I don't blame them. Like if I were, I would do the same thing. I would be, how can I do that? If I put on my attorney brain, what do? You got to put it in the worst light because no one's gonna get sued and say he was a great dude and it sucks that it happened, but he did technically violate code 418 of the 58C.
Yeah.
It's like that's not how it is. So, but what I don't like about that is people on like the general public, they just see something and they're like, oh man, the dude's just a crazy scam. Oh my gosh, like, you know what I mean? And then they don't really know the details. It's kind of like there's a thing this guy said once, and it's so true. When you're going through the, like articles about something and it's about a topic that and you read it and you're like, this is like wrong. this is like so completely wrong. If this, I've seen stuff like I jump back to like this is, I don't get in trouble with this, but back in 2016, the whole Russia Trump Facebook thing. And I remember I had friends being like, Mike, do you know that Russia paid for over 1 million impressions? And like, as my space, I'm like, that's not a lot. You know what I mean?
Just
That's not
nothing.
very
Yeah.
many. It's like nothing,
Yeah.
but there was big articles about more than 1 million impressions in Nebraska or whatever, and I'm like, okay. But then what you find out is when you meet experts and they read the articles that they're experts in, it's happening all the time. There's often inaccuracies, but because you don't know those other fields, you just assume they're accurate. So that was one thing that I'll just say. I'm not trying to defend myself, because there are things now that I know that I would never do, that I didn't know at the time. And I've learned a lot
Yeah.
from that, like we talked about the implied claim stuff. And it's still tough because it's not like there is no yes, no exact answer. There's some obvious ones, but there's such gray areas. And I think that gray is what keeps all of us kind of unsure. I mean, like because, how far do you stretch an implied claim? I've heard showing a nice house in the background can be an implied claim. If
Yeah.
showing, but I think there's a difference between like pulling up and like uh a fancy car and being like, hey, my name is Mike and this is what I've done, versus it just being there. But there's so many nuances. But
I
that's
found I found net impression has been very helpful for me. The more I learn about net
yeah,
impression,
has to
and
be.
I find that even when I do webinars now, like I constantly bring it back to like, hey guys, just so you understand, like this is what and if I've gone off and given you a different idea, this is what it is, and I don't just do that in the beginning and the end. I do it throughout, and honestly, with my audience, it's not made a lick of difference. They appreciate it. I've had
Yeah,
many people say,
I
hey, we
found that.
really appreciate that.
I find that's very true as well. Like, there's so just, and I'll say this too, because I think this is something that people probably think will like get them out of the heat. But so we had disclaimers everywhere. Okay. Everywhere. We had an attorney that reviewed everything, signed off on everything. And we, if you go back and look at, like, I think when it came to the disclaimers, it was like they had to admit they were there, but they really downplayed them. While there were disclaimers on the page, they were towards the bottom and often difficult to find. You know what I mean? Like, so even that doesn't really get you out of it. And even our previous counsel, we said to them, like, well, listen, we have all this proof that we did it. We did what we thought we were supposed to do. And their response to us was, that's great. You have a case against him and we have a case against you.
Yeah.
So just know that as well. You really
It's
need to
very
hire.
similar to you, on it. Like you had counsel that was reviewing, you had paralegals reviewing. It wasn't until you and I started talking, you were like, suck. Okay.
Yeah.
And same thing with them. They were like, oh my gosh, why didn't they tell us this? And I was like,
Yeah.
well, like I said, there's so many nuances to it. It's like what we talked about in our last podcast, trying to find FTC
It's the
counsel.
experience. Yeah.
It's just knowing what you don't know. And eventually, I think the counsel that Mike hired had a good basis, but like he said, we went with the guys who knew they had the nice, and we've talked about it. And unfortunately, I think I could have saved him hundreds of thousands of dollars and probably had a very similar result, because when you hire the large firms, the FTC looks at that and they're like, and there's nothing wrong with the large firms. I'm not trying to bag on large firms, but you think you're paying for something, but the FTC looks at it as like, well, they got money. Let's go after
Yeah.
them. And I'm not saying when they look at me, they say that same thing, but they also know what they're getting, right? And I can get the same resolution a lot of times that they do. I mean, how much did you pay me versus the other law firm, right?
Yeah.
Substantially less, right? But the result at the end of the day, I get similar results, because it like what Mike said, there are only so many conclusions and outcomes that you can have in this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you want to spend a lot of money the best thing to step back is understand what the rules are in advance. If Mike had done that, they were on the path of doing that with me, and they were
Yeah,
doing
we
a
were
good
fixing. Yeah, we were
job.
fixing everything. Our new company was great. Like we had
Yeah,
everything so dialed in. We
the
were had
legacy stuff. Yeah,
compliance phone calls, compliance documents,
right.
recorded phone calls.
Yeah,
Everything was step by step by step.
yeah,
But but it all got
So,
roped into our previous, and
right.
so my couple, and I want everyone to know that too, guys. It goes back 3 years, so you are still responsible for things that you did up to 3 years ago, and that is fair game. So
Well,
if
for
you,
Mike, it was pre-AMG Capital Management, Saronic. So
oh, okay,
they didn't have the limitations of Section 19 and AMG at the time. So they
yeah, the
had
crazy.
14D.
Yeah, yeah, the settlement that we took. I mean, we were debating because we knew that that case was coming up. Like you had said it,
Right.
Greg, and we there was a part of us that did want that, but then there was also like the idea of now we're going to be having to go to court and we're going to have to try to file like a request to like stay the case pending this, and the judge could be like, no, I don't care about that, and we're going to trial. So
yeah,
and by that point in time, like we had literally burned through well over 1.5 probably million, and it wasn't like that was a lot of our cash, and we were
yeah,
kind of winding down the companies because we knew that they were kind of.
sure. But I guess I'm referring to like today, right, Greg? Like, so the bottom line, because I wanna start kind of bringing it home. Yeah, the bottom line is for someone today, if you're an affiliate of a company that's breaking the rules, you are absolutely liable. You absolutely could get brought into the case. In our case, in the Learn case, we had two experts that got dragged into the case last minute. No word throughout the 18. It wasn't 18. It was like a year plus long investigation. No word about that. No questions. Nothing. Last minute, we get the complaint letter. Boom. Two additional names are up there, included, and it felt horrible to me because we hadn't had a chance to prepare them at all. Right? Obviously, I knew my name would be on there, so I was preparing. They just got boom. They just got this like whiplash. Right as the complaint letter came out. So interesting to hear from your experience, Mike. So the answer to the person who is the salesperson who asked me yesterday is yes, absolutely. And it's interesting, Mike, because he asked me another question and he said, so Greg, real quick for you, and that way I can just answer this person. He said, can my commissions get clawed back? I didn't know that's a possibility, but Mike, you just said that if an operation is determined or deemed to be, deceptive or whatever, or a scam, then the people that they've paid can be required to pay that money back. Is that right, Greg?
Worse than that, it's the technically, and at least for us and some ones that I've seen, they can ask for the full uh, amount. So even though we only got paid like a cut of the sale, we were still responsible for the full sale.
Oh wow.
It's almost like a reverse like
Yeah.
Ponzi in a weird way, because everybody, like the credit card companies that process the sales, they were responsible for all of it. So if you added it up, 100% sale had a 500+% payback, because it was like the company that did this, the company that processed it, the bank that took it. You know what I mean? Like everybody was getting hit. So they can do that. They can go as far as they want, and they can hold you for the full amount, knowing for well that most of us don't have that. You know what I mean? Because like for us, we had salespeople, so we only got half the payout. 30% went to the sales group, so we were on very tight,
Yeah.
things there. But one more
So,
thing on it too. I think
okay.
I want people to know this too from the flip side. Um, and this is a big one. This is a big one. That's a big problem, and I don't think people even think of it. I mean, they might, but you're responsible for your affiliates too,
Yeah.
whatever they do. They are 100% seen as a extension of your company. And 99% of the time, the affiliates are rinky dink little dudes in their basements. They don't care about them. They're not going to go after them. They're not going to waste resources, but they will go after the bigger company. So if you even have an affiliate program, literally you have opened yourself up to massive risk, because one affiliate says one thing, makes one claim, one thing they say, you can be held, you are responsible. That's your ad now, right? And no one
Yeah.
really thinks about that. So I've told a lot of people, like, unless you really know what you're doing, you have a team on it, I wouldn't even have in a affiliate program unless it's tightly controlled, and even then it's impossible because you
Yeah.
can't. I mean, we looked for tech. How can we see every ad that they run? But these dudes, that's their whole job. Their job is to run these ads, and they don't want you to spy on them, so they hide everything, right? So it's
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
But that's a big area too. And I don't know the fix for that, other than
Yeah.
like really being tight and making people submit their ads and stuff. But you have to really watch out for that.
So,
You
Greg, have you
you
seen
just
have you seen clawbacks, Greg, in
Yeah,
cases?
so what Mike is talking about, and this is true, and I know we haven't even talked about this because your case was you,
Hmm.
but Mike's case, what they'll say is when they have several different parties they bring into the action, they call it joint and several liability, which means you're all jointly liable, and if one of you can't pay for the full amount of damages they're looking for, then all of you are individually responsible for the entire amount, the entire amount.
Wow.
So that's what he's talking about. And that's scary, right? Because you think about it, like for most of the marketers that are watching this, they have some sort of, and let's just be honest, the net kind of the amount of money that most of you are netting is going to be on average between 10 to 20% that you're putting in your pocket from this venture. You've got advertising costs, you've got sales costs that Mike just talked about, you've got split agreements with somebody else. You're putting 10 to 20% in your pocket. But when the commission or regulatory bodies come in, they don't care about that. They want the full amount. I'm dealing with a regulatory action in the state of Utah right now that's 5 years going. We had trial over a year ago, and they still don't have a ruling in the case. The amount that the state of Utah is asking in that case is $100 million. This company did not generate $100 million. They're looking at the total amount across the boards that customers paid, and they're going after them as joint and severally for the entire amount. They don't take into account that you've paid your salespeople, your advertising. They don't care about that. They go across it. And if they can get a judgment against the main company and they say it's a fraudulent conveyance, they will claw back the entire amount from you regardless. So in Mike's case, they actually went after a bank as well. And
Hmm.
so in that bank, they went and they took all of the reserves. It was millions of dollars of reserves. After this case, that bank stopped doing business in the information space. They were like, we are not doing any more. It was a big bank in that case.
Hmm.
They were like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. Because the 8 million in reserves, that was all chargebacks that were happening because Mike said another really important thing that we haven't really talked about yet is the original company came to them to offer support because when you get in a full asset freeze, what happens is it doesn't just affect the company and the individual owners of the company, but now they don't have the ability to fulfill the services in which they've promised to provide. So the asset freeze in itself, it affects the ability of that company to go through and provide the services. So this case in Utah that I mentioned, they originally got an asset freeze that I was able to get dismissed because they weren't entitled to it in the first place, but the courts gave it to them. And after that happened, they had hired a third party company to provide support, but that third party company was like, I'm not doing that because I don't want to get pulled in this case. So all those clients from that moment on, no support. What did that do? Well, now it opened all this additional damage because these clients weren't getting fulfilled upon and they were saying, "Oh, we have been harmed now." Well, who caused the harm? It wasn't the individual company. It was the regulatory body that stopped the service. And that's a lot. And unfortunately, they don't care. They don't care
Yeah.
that they're causing the future damage and harm because they think, well, we're stopping, the perpetual harm that's already happened. But the action of getting an asset freeze, no support from that moment on. It's
Yeah.
so there's a lot
Did
of concepts a lot of people don't think of. Sorry.
Mike, in your case, did you have an asset freeze?
No.
No, that was the
No.
great part. I guess that was like, I thank God for that part about it. I mean, that was something that we were always sort of like scared about. But the truth is, like, we reached out to them. You know what I mean? When we went to when we went to the trustee thing, we knew that the FTC was involved. So the counsel we had at the time said, I'm gonna like CC the FTC on everything. So I actually do know at one point, one of the, I think FTC's, said something to the effect of, it's a good thing that you guys reached out to us, because if not, we could have went for an asset freeze and done this, and that. It's like, so that is something. And I think now, post the 2020 or what every year, I don't think they can't do that quite as much unless they, unless you have a
Right.
phone sales, I think. So,
Right.
but yeah, that was something that was very scary. That was probably like, I definitely will say for me, that definitely pushed me more towards wanting to just get it done with, because you just don't know what they're gonna do, and they have
So,
such power. You're kind of just there.
so Mike, I know this is public, and I mean it's in the settlement, but like, what did you guys, as an affiliate, what did you end up settling? What were the terms of the settlement? Are you banned or barred from the space? Was it
Yeah.
how much did you end up giving? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? And then the last question I want to ask to wrap things up is just, what does life afterwards look like? What are you doing now, and just how have you changed what you do based off of what you learned?
Yeah. So basically, the settlement we agreed to was like, I can't remember the exact amount, but something like 700 and something thousand, 756.
Wow.
That's my guess on it, I think. And
Yeah.
that was after we'd already spent millions to
Yeah.
get to that point. I mean, like Greg said, like truthfully, we could have called him up day one and just given them the same amount and probably got the same deal, and just
Yeah.
been done with it. But we didn't know it at the time. So I would say, if anyone's going through anything like that, it's painful, because you're gonna feel all these feelings. Like, I'm right. I didn't do this. That's not true. Maybe I did this wrong, but everyone does it. I remember, that's a big thing, right? This is what everyone does. Everyone does that. You feel that kind of thing. The terms we had said it's kind of like speeding. You get caught, and yeah, you were all speeding, but hey, so were you. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, basically, we agreed to not do kind of not do what we were doing then. I do want to say one more big thing too. That was a thing for me that was super tough, and I get it and I understand it. But this is also something that people don't really think about going through this. Back in 2011, 12, I was actually on a weight loss TV show. So I was on a show where I lost in a year like 255 pounds in
Wow.
1 year. So I went from like I think I was 493, and I went down to 238, which is great. But
Wow, man.
what that ended up, yeah, it was an awesome story. But what a lot of work, I'll say that. But what was bad was, after my settlement, after that was all said and done, like 6 months had gone by, and I was feeling really good, because it was like not a real big thing. I was kind of like, wow, it's kind of over. Anik, you were definitely more public than me, like out there as like the face. I wasn't ever really like out there, so it didn't really affect me much. It wasn't like there was anyone like, oh, sorry, bro, and it was just kind of like whatever. But then, I believe, I don't know this. I don't have any proof of it, but I think it was the trustee, like basically sent the story to my local paper. And again, if I was a journalist, you better believe I'm going to write that story. So they did this big piece about, from weight loss to alleged scam, the truth. You know what I mean? It was like this big expose piece. And I mean, there was like all my mom was getting all these phone calls from her friends, like, is your son in prison? What's happening? Is he okay? Like, it was just this terrible thing. And
Yeah.
again, I'm very I'm able to separate, right? Because again, it's a great story. You have a guy that lost all his weight, and now he's in trouble with this, and you're gonna run that. But that was definitely painful, and I would say that story has cost me a lot of things. We were trying to buy a company once, and someone read that story and was like, "Oh, we're out." You know what I mean? So there is cost, there is pain, and it's obviously something that I take responsibility for, it, because I was there, I was in charge. I should have done and known things that I didn't know at the time. But yeah, that was basically it. So post the settlement, I moved a lot more into like health stuff, because I did have weight loss. That's been like a sub thing that I've
Mm.
always enjoyed. So now, to what I do now is, I mainly, I don't really actually own anything, because I've kind of just been more of a consultant type thing. So I've done a lot of consulting things where I'll talk to, like, I'll do things with like supplement companies, and I do work with an agency that I kind of front that, and we generate, and we do a lot of like B2B. So I've kind of done a lot more B2B stuff. Um,
Hmm.
and I jokingly, I was always trying to figure out what do you call that sort of info space when you're teaching business, and I came up with the perfect thing to call it, and I now call it B to wannabe. So I try to stay out of the B to wannabe space,
Yeah.
because that's where the heat is, and like the FTC said, that's a target rich environment, because they
Yeah.
just, to be frank, they told me if they could, they would shut down anything that teaches anything about making income to them. If they could just it was gone, they would. So because
Wow.
their view is that it's overall net bad than it is net good.
Yeah.
So you do have to be really, really careful there. But yeah, that's kind of, now I would say that's probably been my biggest like scars, is I don't really want to own anything. I'm still trying to work through that.
Yeah.
Um, so
It's PTSD, man. I mean, it leaves scars that someone asked me the other day, it was a couple weeks ago. They said, "Do you feel like you're looking over your back?" And I said, "Yeah." It leaves these weird scars, and at this point now, anything major that we do has to go through Greg, and it has to get redlined. And we're building all these mechanisms in our company. My company itself, my top people have really learned compliance, and then we built a software to check, and then we've got Greg. So we got like triple layer things checking, and still then it's not 100% by any means. I mean, we could make a mistake, but I don't think people realize that being sued by or being investigated by the government, by any regulator, because as Greg says, the FTC might be the 5,000-pound gorilla, the state governments are the 3,000-pound gorilla. You don't want either one of them sitting on you. And it is one of those things, everyone, that literally shifts the axis upon which your life rotates. It's a life-altering event, and you never. I don't want to say you never come back from it. I mean, I just mean you're never the same after that. Like, life will be different fundamentally for you after that. And again, this is for the people that are like, I'll just deal with it when it happens. It's like, I wish 50 times I could go back and deal with it before it happened, and address it. So, Greg, I want to wrap things up here, but as an attorney, I mean, I learned a lot in this episode, and I'm really grateful to you, Mike, for being on, because there are hundreds of thousands of affiliates that need to hear this episode, that need to understand that they are not they're not protected just because they're not the company. If you are promoting the company, anyways, Greg, anything you want to add?
No, I just
Summarize?
appreciate Mike. It's painful, like just it was in your settlement, to watch
Yeah.
Mike go through his settlement, because you sit there on the sidelines, and it was even worse with there because I wasn't doing the settlement, and you just feel bad because they're just, him and his partner are just really good people, right? They're just good
Yeah.
people. Like I represented on a case that settled last year, and the FTC actually had a press release just this week on that case because they're giving settlement amounts out. And it's horrible. Like, the press releases are just, they don't communicate with you. In fact, they said things that weren't even in the complaint that were in the press release, because I went back and looked at the complaint to see, like, they said that? Did they say that? They didn't even say that in the complaint. And it's like a constant reminder. So it's like a year almost later after a settlement, and then it just gets hit again. And then all of a sudden there's that, publicity on it again, just like what Mike had with the local story. You think it's over, but then they keep popping it up because they want to stay relevant. They're advertisers, right? They
yeah,
want what they're doing to be relevant. So they want everybody to see, look how we've saved people. And that's the frustrating part, because we don't get a narrative. Mike doesn't get a narrative. You don't get to come out and say, hey, this is your, except for here. This is
Yeah.
your, where you can say, listen, we're good people. We didn't think we were doing is wrong. We found out, made mistakes on some stuff that we could have corrected easy, and it wouldn't have affected your businesses. It didn't affect Mike's business. They were
no,
being
our new company
successful.
was great. Our new company was
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, and that's one thing I've always said. I wish they had like what I was calling it, like the daylight law, which is like, if you operate in daylight, you should be given a chance to correct before you're just turned off. And maybe they're getting more towards that now, is what it seems like. But that was, yeah, I don't know. But that was a big thing for me. It's like, I don't, like, I don't think if you're like trying to, if in your mind, like, hey, I'm going to perpetuate this huge scam, why would you hold events and how would you invite people to the events and bring in guest speakers and have
Well,
like famous
dude,
TV, like,
in my
yeah.
case, I spent $4 million building a facility. I was in every day, 9 to 5, and I used to talk about that publicly, like, "Hey, this is where I am all the time." And I was jokingly saying we're 30 minutes away from the FTC's building. I'm like, literally, if there was an issue, call me in and tell me, and I'll immediately stop it, right? And you give me a proper warning. And so I have my thoughts as to what I wish and how, but it's irregardless. They run the way they do. But that's an interesting point, Greg. So in my case, I can expect in a few months for another press release to hit when they actually send out the refunds to people. And in that press release, they don't just say, hey, by the way, we've sent out the money. They reinstate that this person was this and this person was that and they're horrible and all these
And I would
things.
say this, and I'm not trying to point out the FTC, but read the case. Don't just they assign it to some other person to write that press release. And
Wow.
like the one that hit yesterday, they didn't even read the case. They just put what they wanted to. And they may
Yeah.
say as alleged in the case. And then I went back and read the allegations. I'm like, that wasn't anywhere in the case. So they just
I'll say, yeah, I'll say one last thing too, which is kind of interesting, and I think this is what we deal with. I think that it becomes, we're not people anymore. We're like a stereotype, because
right.
even in the journalist that wrote the thing about me, I don't really, again, it's not his fault. I couldn't really, I wasn't allowed to really do a phone call with him because I was advised don't you do it because there's no good that'll come be there. But he basically opened it with his idea of what someone like that would be. So it says something like Mike traveled the world teaching get rich quick schemes, you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. And like I never did that ever. That was not me. Like if anyone that actually knows me knows I'm not that way. I even, the few times that I did speak, I even joked about the commissions we earned were this. But if I actually made that much, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be somewhere else. You know what I mean? That was like my opening joke, and I talked about expenses and what it costs and it takes all this
Mm,
time. But yeah, so I think that part of it becomes that there's not room in media for stories of who you are, so you just become, you're the stereotypical late night chuckster, you know what I mean, like that's just, you become that,
yeah.
that's the cookie
Boiler room. Yep.
Yeah.
And
cutter
and
view.
what you said is true on another aspect on this was that my general advice to clients when they see that is not to attack it because you make it more relevant. When you stand
Yeah.
up, you do a press release in response. I mean, we went through this on your stuff, right? We were
Yep.
like, how do we convey this to our client base about what really happened? Because you see a narrative that they give and you want to be able to say your story. But what I've found is when you do that, you make the initial story more relevant and then it draws more attention to what the FTC was saying in the first place or the regulatory body was saying in the first place. And so
Yeah.
it's oftentimes better just to take a wait and see approach than to try to proactively. Because I've had clients other than you both that are like, screw this, let's go ahead, we're going to blam blast and sue the FTC or the regulatory bodies because they're defaming us. That's not what the case was about. We didn't even admit this in the settlement. It says we didn't admit to any guilt, but they make
Yeah.
it seem their net impression is that we're guilty bastards that are out there doing, and it's like, what are you gonna get out of that?
Yeah.
You're
Well,
feel better,
a
but do
what
better.
is it? HR Block just sued the FTC. I think I saw that yesterday. So that'll be interesting.
Well,
But
they lose. They lose the DirecTV case. They ended up losing that case
yeah.
and was dismissed. But that, guess what wasn't done after that? DirecTV didn't do a press release and said to the world, "Hey, guess what, everybody? We actually won this case and was dismissed by a bench trial in San
Yeah.
Francisco, the most liberal places in the world." But
Yeah.
you don't hear those things, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Anik, if you ever want, you can take this joke. We can end with this one. As a marketer, I wasn't sued by the FTC. I was featured on FTC.gov.
Yeah.
So feel free to use that one.
Oh, man. All right, man. Well, listen, Mike, thank you. I know this can't be easy to come back and rehash and relive. And I appreciate you doing it. And Greg, thanks for the introduction. But this is a really powerful message. We have not covered this on the podcast yet, which is the risk that you take on as an affiliate and then therefore also as a contractor. And I think what I've learned from you, Greg, in the past is especially if you're paid on a percentage of basis. So if you are participating in the gains in a percentage of basis, you're considered a partner of it, regardless of your status. So, Mike, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for that. Greg, thank you very much. And the rest of you, leave a comment below. Give a shout out to Mike just for him coming up and sharing the story. It's not easy. I'm telling you guys, I've asked a few people that I know that are FTC bros, and they've said no. They've politely said, hey, I don't want to. And I don't blame them at all. This is not a comfortable scenario, place to be. And remember, one other thing I want to reinstate to everybody. This podcast and what we're doing here is not about at all in any way, not even 1% of it is about bashing the FTC. I've consistently said that I actually still support the hell out of them. I think that the reason they're created is a great reason. I think they do good work, and I've forever was on the sidelines cheering them on, and until I got wrapped up in the mix. I don't always agree with everything that they say or do or how they do it, but that's okay. I'm American. I get to disagree with some of the things, but doesn't mean I won't comply and follow the rules, or at least try my best to. So I want everyone to understand that we tell these stories to tell our perspective, but mostly the goal is to get you to wake up, to make you understand that this is real, it happens, and it could happen to you, and it's just not worth it. Man, it's the worst thing ever. So with that said, I always say when life pushes you, stand straight, smile, and push it the heck back. Thanks, everybody. Leave a comment. Tell everyone about this episode. See you guys later. Bye.